Twist of Fate Part 1. Jack lingered on the sidewalk, his gaze fixed on the modest house nestled under the twilight's soft cloak. The last hues of the setting sun cast a gentle glow on the residence, as he watched Sara through the slightly parted curtains of her living room. She moved with a solitary grace, her short brown hair framing the starkness of her piercing blue eyes. Eyes that seemed to cut through the mundane and into the very fabric of one's being. Evening routine, just like clockwork, Jack murmured to himself, a wry smile tugging at the corner of his lips. For months now, Jack had been a silent observant of Sara's life, an unseen specter haunting the fringes of her life. He was intimately familiar with the rhythmic cadence of her daily rituals, from the early morning light that brushed her cheeks as she sipped her coffee, to the way she fussed over her houseplants with tender, loving care. His knowledge of her went beyond what any neighbor might claim. It was thorough, invasive, almost intimate. He even knew the scent of her shampoo, a floral fragrance that lingered in the air long after she'd left for work. Green tea and jasmine, he whispered, closing his eyes for a moment, savoring the imagined aroma. Jack shifted his weight from one foot to the other, the concrete beneath him cold and unyielding. He felt a perverse pride in the depth of his observation, how he could chart her life like an unseen cartographer marking the contours of a secret land. Alone again tonight, Sara? He thought, his heart thrumming with a dark anticipation. Another book, another quiet evening, he continued, his voice barely above a breath as he watched her nestle into her sofa, the soft lamplight casting a halo around her. Always so self-reliant. It's admirable, really, Jack mused internally, but his thoughts twisted with a sinister thread. But everyone has a breaking point. He clenched his hands into fists, feeling the familiar hunger gnawing at his insides, a yearning that was bound to the essence of who he was, or what he feared he might become. His deep-set brown eyes, usually warm and disarming, now reflected a different kind of hunger, one that clawed at him, demanding satisfaction. Mustn't get too close, or linger too long, he warned himself. The rules of the game were clear, and he had played it well so far. To be seen was to lose, to disrupt the delicate dance of hunter and prey. Freedom's just on the other side, isn't it, Sara? Jack said softly, though the street remained empty, his words swallowed by the coming night. You've been chosen, I'll free you from your solitude, from the burden of your life. The streetlight flickered overhead, casting shadows across Jack's face as he took one last look at Sara sitting alone contentedly in her modest home. And yet, there was a shadow within him, too. A darkness that no light could touch, one that whispered of the terrible things hidden in the guise of an average man. Tomorrow, then, Jack decided, turning away from the house with an unsettling resolve. Tomorrow, you'll be freed. The stillness of Sonora Lane was almost palpable, broken only by the occasional drift of leaves scuttling across well-manicured lawns. Each house stood like a silent sentinel guarding the secrets within, their uniformity a testament to the quiet lives unfolding behind closed doors. Sara's little house nestled among them, its modest facade hiding the life of a woman cocooned in self-imposed exile. Sara preferred to be alone, it's better this way. Such tranquility, Jack murmured from his vantage point, his voice a whisper lost in the background of the typical sound of suburban life. His gaze was fixated on the lone figure moving behind the sheer curtain of the front window. Sara, unaware of her audience, strolled through the living room with the grace of a solitary dancer. She watered a collection of potted plants perched on the windowsill, her movements tender and deliberate. Streetlights streamed in, casting a halo around her as she worked her way through her small green oasis. Each one's got a name, I bet, Jack mused to himself, knowing how she whispered to them, nurturing them with words meant for no other ears. Thirsty, aren't you? Sara spoke softly to an ivy plant, her fingers tracing the delicate veins of its leaves. The corners of her mouth lifted in a private smile, a moment of communion between nature and nurturer. Jack shifted his weight, the concrete cold beneath him despite the warmth of earlier that day. He watched intently as Sara settled into an armchair, a book cradled in her hands. He could almost hear the soft rustle of pages turning, each one a leaf in the quiet forest of her solitude. What world are you escaping to today, Sara? He pondered, imagining the plotlines that captivated her, the characters that kept her company. Escape? Is that what we both seek? His own question surprised him, the interior thought unearthing a kinship he hadn't considered before. His heart thrummed a little faster, not just with hunger but with something akin to understanding. Maybe you're not so different from me, he conceded, the admission leaving a bitter taste in his mouth. It was a dangerous path to tread, finding common ground with his prey. Focus, Jack, he chastised himself, shaking off the errant emotions. This wasn't about empathy, it was about hunger, about need. Yet, as he watched her rise and move to a small desk cluttered with personal projects, the lines between them blurred further. There, amidst the chaos of creativity, she found order. Pieces of jewelry lay half-assembled, beads lined up like colorful constellations against the wooden surface. Her concentration was absolute, a fortress of focus that Jack admired, and resented. It's a shame, such beauty in isolation, he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. But beauty needs to be seen, doesn't it, Sara? The irony was not lost on him. He saw her, every facet of her existence, and yet she remained blissfully ignorant of his penetrating gaze. Tomorrow I'll free you, he repeated, the word a mantra to steel his resolve. The coming night would bring with it, action, satisfaction, release. But, not now. Jack rose from his perch, blending back into the shadows of the peaceful neighborhood that was anything but ordinary. As he walked away, circling the neighborhood to not draw attention to himself, the echo of his footsteps was a lonely counterpoint to the silence of Sonora Lane, where the darkness held more than just the promise of night. Gotta move. Don't draw attention to myself, he said with a boyish grin. He's getting good at this game, too good. The coppery scent of tomato soup wafted through the modest kitchen as Sara Livingston stirred the simmering pot with a wooden spoon, her movements methodical and unhurried. The faint sound of the spoon clinking against the pot's edges formed a homely rhythm in the quiet house. Outside, the lavender twilight cast long, reaching shadows that crept up to the windows, as if curious about the solitary woman who resided within. Perfect, she murmured to herself, tasting the soup and finding the seasoning just right. Her piercing blue eyes reflected the satisfaction of someone who took pleasure in simple comforts. She poured the thick, tasty soup into a bowl, the steam curling up like soft tendrils reaching for solace in the cool air of the kitchen. Ah, let's see what's new tonight, Sara said, remote in hand, as she settled onto her well-worn couch. The cushions conformed to her body, a testament to many evenings spent exactly like this one. A vibrant nature documentary flickered to life on the screen, bringing bursts of color and life into the room. Sara's eyes were drawn to the exotic landscapes and creatures. The thought of exploration was exciting, as long as it was from the safety of her home. Meanwhile, from across the street, Jack returned to watch, to learn, to memorize. His deep-set brown eyes were fixed on the flickering lights that danced across Sara's curtains. You find your escape in these little rituals, don't you, Sara? He whispered, his voice barely breaking the silence of the night. He imagined her curled up inside, losing herself in the fabricated realities that flickered before her. As the clock chimed 9, marking the passing of another hour, Sara rose, stretching languorously before moving room to room, her hands trailing over the light switches, the soft clicks signaling the end of day. Jack's gaze followed her shadowed figure through the fabric of the drapes. Her routine was a dance he had come to know by heart. "Good night, world," she said softly, though there was no one to hear her words but the walls. With each turn of a lock, her home became a fortress. Sara checked each one twice. Trust but verify, she said to herself. Trust didn't come easy, and self-reliance was her creed. Safe. Secure. She reassured herself, while Jack's fascination grew with every affirmed bolt. There was something undeniably intimate about witnessing these moments. They were mundane to anyone else, but to him, they were precious insights into her inner self. Until tomorrow, Sara sighed contentedly, unaware of the dark silhouette that mirrored her every move from the darkness outside. She disappeared from view, leaving Jack alone with the silent houses and the cold embrace of the night. Tomorrow indeed, Jack mused, the anticipation curling inside him like a dormant serpent. As the neighborhood plunged into quiet slumber, he turned away, carrying the image of Sara's nightly ritual in his mind's eye, a ritual that, unbeknownst to her, they shared. "Sweet dreams, my dear Sara," he muttered, stepping back into the shadows that seemed to swell eagerly around him. But the night was not yet finished. In the distance, a dog barked sharply, shattering the stillness, a harbinger of the unseen and unheard that prowled just beyond the veil of tranquility. The hunger inside Jack was a living thing, an incessant gnawing that clawed at his very soul, demanding to be satisfied. He stood motionless on the sidewalk, the cool night air prickling his skin. As he watched Sara's house, her silhouette crossed the drawn curtains on her way to her room. His breath fogged before him, and he drew it back sharply, not daring to disturb the sacred quiet of the night. Must free her, he whispered under his breath, his words a sinuous thread unraveling in the darkness. It's mercy. Liberation from the solitude that chains her, she's chosen. But as his gaze fixated on the last flicker of light in Sara's bedroom window, a movement, a distortion, caught the corner of his eye. It was darker than any shadow had the right to be, a nothingness that swallowed the weak glow of the street lamps. For a moment, Jack forgot himself, his eyes trailing after the formless specter that danced just out of clear view. Impossible, he murmured, feeling an icy shiver snake up his spine. Shadows don't move like that, not without. Hello? The voice severed the night like a blade through silk. Startled, Jack spun around, his heart pounding with the force of a drum. He locked eyes with Sara, who had stepped outside her front door, confusion etched across her face. Her piercing blue eyes, wide and searching, met his, and in that instant, he knew, he'd been careless. Who are you? Is everything okay? Can I help you? Sara's voice was steady, but underneath lay a tremor of unease. She wrapped her arms around herself, her gaze never leaving Jack's figure. Jack nervously looked around. Where had the shadow gone? Was it really even there? No, everything is okay, Jack replied, forcing a smile that felt like a distortion on his own face. Just out for a walk. Late night air helps me think. His mind raced, concocting lies as swiftly as his pulse. The story continues with part 2. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Sara squinted, taking a tentative step forward. I've seen you before, haven't I? She pressed, her voice laced with suspicion. Around the neighborhood? Perhaps, he conceded, keeping his tone light, non-threatening. Small world and all that. Jack nervously looked around. Where had the shadow gone? Was it really even there? The shadow writhed around him, a silent partner in this deadly dance. Sara's brows furrowed, a frown creasing her lips as she studied the dark aura that clung to him. Her instincts screamed that something was amiss, yet reason fought against the primal fear. Strange, she mused aloud, more to herself than to Jack. There's a weird shadow. It's moving around you, but there's no light behind you to cast it. Tricks of the light, or lack thereof, Jack offered with a shrug, his mind whirling with the need to retreat, to plan anew. Quite common at nighttime. Right, Sara said slowly, unconvinced. She took a step back toward the safety of her door, her eyes still fixed on Jack. Well, good night then. Good night, he replied, a hint of reverence in his tone. And as she retreated into her fortress of solitude, Jack turned and walked away, the shadow clinging to him like a second skin, a testament to the otherworldly bond they shared. Careless, he chastised himself silently. Can't afford mistakes. As he disappeared into the night, the unspoken promise hung heavy in the air. Soon, he would return, driven by the inexorable hunger within. Sara, unbeknownst to her, had become chosen, destined to be freed from the burden of living. But for now, she remained safe behind her locked doors, unaware of the fleeting glimpse of something unusual, a whisper of destiny's call, that lingered outside her window. The night lay draped over the neighborhood like a moth-eaten shroud, the quiet so profound it bordered on the surreal. Occasionally, the silence was broken by the distant hum of a car engine as it rolled past, its headlights briefly illuminating the skeletal trees that lined the street before succumbing once more to darkness. Dogs barked intermittently, their cries echoing through the empty streets, a reminder that life still stirred within this serene suburban neighborhood. Jack walked at an uneven pace, his footsteps soft against the pavement. As he moved, he could feel the weight of exhaustion pulling at him, a physical manifestation of mental fatigue that clouded his thoughts. Shouldn't be this tired, he muttered to himself, each word punctuated by puffs of visible breath in the chill air. Just need to keep it together. But something inside Jack rebelled against his self-assurances. His body felt exhausted, each step an effort of will. The hunger that drove him had receded to a dull ache, but it was replaced by a feeling of impending doom. He tried to shake off the feeling, attributing it to the adrenaline crash after tonight's unexpected encounter with Sara. Focus, Jack whispered, commanding his trembling limbs to obey. You just need some rest. As he approached his house, the sense of unease peaked within him. By the time he fumbled with his keys and stumbled through the front door, a wave of dizziness washed over him. With great effort, he managed to kick the door closed behind him. What's going on? Jack slurred, the walls of his home tilting and warping around him. He groped blindly for support, finding the back of his couch and collapsing onto it. He lay there, motionless in the dark, his mind churning with fractured thoughts and fears. Can't let this happen, he gasped, panic threading through his confusion. Sara doesn't suspect. I have to. His words dissipated into the darkness as his eyelids grew impossibly heavy. Surrendering to the fatigue, Jack fell into a deep slumber, a sleep devoid of dreams, yet fraught with a perilous emptiness. Hours later, the sharp sting at the back of his throat roused him from unconsciousness. Jack's eyes flickered open, the world coming into focus slowly, painfully. He lifted a hand to his face and recoiled as his fingers came away wet and warm. Blood? He rasped, staring at the crimson smear on his hand. The metallic scent filled his nostrils, intensifying the nausea that roiled in his stomach. Why? He rose unsteadily, making his way to the bathroom mirror. The reflection that stared back at him was paler than usual, the brown eyes that normally held such calculated intent now clouded with confusion. And from his nose, a trickle of blood made its slow descent, stark against his pale skin. Something's wrong, Jack admitted, the truth of his condition settling in. This isn't just fatigue. His heart hammered in his chest, not just with fear, but with the realization that something beyond his understanding was at play. Does it have something to do with the weird shadow thing he saw last night? Didn't Sara say something about a weird shadow over him? Whatever it was, it had latched onto him, draining his strength, leaving him vulnerable. Tomorrow, he promised his haggard reflection. I'll figure it out tomorrow. With that uncertain assurance, Jack turned his back on his own image, feeling the pull of his bed and the promise of oblivion it offered. But as he left the bathroom, he couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching him, hidden within the shadows of his own home. Jack's fingers curled into fists, the fabric of the couch cushion bunching beneath his grip. The echo of his own labored breath filled the room, a stark contrast to the silence that filled the neighborhood just hours before. He had been so close, teetering on the edge of satiating the gnawing hunger inside him, and yet he faltered. Careless, he muttered to himself, his voice a low growl. You were too damn careless, Jack. The self-loathing stung, but it was nothing compared to the rage simmering within him. Sara Livingston, with her piercing blue eyes that seemed almost luminescent in the moonlight, had nearly caught him. She was meant to be his liberation from this unyielding appetite, not the catalyst for his undoing. I won't give up, he vowed into the empty room. The words were meant to be affirming, but they trembled with a mix of determination and desperation. Sara doesn't know how much of a burden life is. I'll free her from it. It has to be soon. His mind replayed the moment Sara's gaze locked onto where he stood, hidden by darkness yet exposed by fate. The swirling shadow around him, something more than nightfall, had startled even him, and she see it too? Hello? Sara's voice from earlier in the evening whispered through his memory, who are you? Jack's imagination raced with endless of possibilities, taunting him with what could have been if he had been revealed. Nobody, he whispered, his voice laced with bitterness. I'm nobody, Sara. Just a shadow. Your shadow. He rose from the couch, pacing like a caged animal. Every step was an effort to shake off the weariness that clung to him like a second skin. His body felt heavy, as if every ounce of vitality had been siphoned away. Got to pull it together, Jack thought, stopping in mid-stride. Can't let whatever this is interfere. She needs me to end her loneliness. As the hours stretched on, the weight of his eyelids became unbearable, and Jack surrendered to sleep once more, collapsing back onto the couch. But the rest was far from peaceful. His dreams were haunted by unimaginable horrors of another world. Creatures that are impossible to describe, some just formless dark shapes. Somewhere in the depths of the night, a soft scratching noise interrupted the quiet outside Jack's window. It was faint, barely audible over the whisper of leaves in the gentle wind, yet persistent. A sound out of place in the tranquil suburbia, it tugged at the edges of the ordinary, suggesting that something horrible is coming.